Hi there, Cosmic Family. My name is Elial. The moon went out from Pisces and entered in Aries. So it is going to accompany the chart of the equinox that happens tomorrow, March 20th, when the sun enters the sign. There are waiting Neptune, Saturn, Venus, and Chiron at the final degrees that, they are doing, their transit through here. Chiron this year is going to give us an anticipation of its passage through Taurus. But, anyways, we have a stellium of fire right now that is going to push us, that is pushing us already to the action, to the advancement, to make decisions, assuming risks, being courageous. But also to regulate impulsive actions, to regulate the impatience, because decisions that are emerging from this state, from this wheel of accelerating processes that are not assimilated yet, this means an escapism from the present moment, could be, in first place, things that are not opening any path, could be deviations of what is really constructive right now, or with the presence of Saturn, we could lead ourselves to a karmic lesson. I mean, if you remember what I mentioned in the configuration of the new moon in Pisces, that is still in manifestation for the rest of the week. Mercury retrograde in Pisces that awakens tomorrow, but moves out of the stationary period on March 24th. I explained this on Sunday. It's making a conjunction with the North Node and an opposition with the South Node in Virgo. For many people, this is implying the typical manifestations of Mercury retrograde, people that are from the past that are returning, or we could talk about experiences, situations that could have a different appearance, but in its essence, they contain the same learning, the same lesson. So Mercury retrograde, being in a connection with the nodes, could represent that everything that is linked with this kind of repetition is happening to approach this situation this time in a different way. And as I indicated in that video, both the new moon and the equinox are beginnings of cycles. So if there is something that we are in resistance to integrate or making a different action to open the path to a new energy, situations could manifest, again, situations that perhaps you wanted to leave behind, or you could be creating a blockage, something that is preventing from our own decisions, something that is preventing that areas that life could actually change, producing the sensation of stagnation. So all of this, of course, has a price. I am referring that a painful situation could be repeated in a way that is much more uncomfortable, because Saturn in Aries has this very abrupt expression. It is like something that is kicking us to grow up, or irritation, anger, frustration, because we are denying our own inner voice, could also take form in symptoms in the physical body, or insisting in some area and finding blockages once and again. Challenges are part of our experience along the whole way, even if we are choosing to walk in alignment with our soul. But if there is something that clearly isn't moving forward, we have to develop humbleness to recognize that we have to do something different, or perhaps it is about renouncement to an objective, a goal, to recognize that when we say no to something that isn't working, it is to say yes to something that is for us. I am referring that this culture that we can with everything, and that we have to chase everything that we desire, doesn't always apply, because some of those desires could be linked to perceptions that are distorted, linked with reality, as wanting a person that doesn't desire to be emotionally present in a relationship to be so, or could be linked with a structure of the identity that doesn't have to do with the function of the soul, like wanting to do certain career because of the status that can offer to society, but the soul doesn't really vibrate with that. So we could talk about other aspects more related to Neptune in Aries. For example, people that have been in this excessive empathy, in the justification or the unmeasured comprehension to the environment, towards the environment, paradoxically, the excess of empathy, it is not empathy anymore. It turns into selfishness with oneself, but also with others, because what happens is that we cannot repress the energy. We cannot repress the forces of cosmos. And when we don't put boundaries to those situations, the energy gets out of control in other areas. If we are not expressing the aggressiveness in a healthy way, it is going to be manifested perhaps in insistence towards other people in other areas that we shouldn't to do so, or focusing on what we want without caring, without mattering if we are invading the other person with our energy or forcing the other person to do something from our own imbalances. Could be the reactive anger because things aren't happening the way we want, or even the shadow of Neptune that frequently is expressed, deceiving to attain a goal. What happens is many times deceit is something that is accepted by society when it is something not that big. And truth is that lying, even in tiny situations, to justify a selfish desire is an imbalance and has its consequences. Pretending that I am not understanding good, that we are not understanding, or that we are not able to do that thing alone, so we are forcing other person to help us. That has also a lesson. On the other side, this excessive empathy isn't helping the other person too, because we are not pushing the other person to develop the independence that they need to develop, the maturity and responsibility over their own lives and decisions. Also, there are other expressions of this energy of Saturn and Neptune that involve, as I was saying, being brave, the facing with our fears, incarnating the role of greater leadership in our experience. Could be initiating a project or taking an opportunity that moves out from our known space, but helps us to develop capacities, or initiating a path that responds to what your soul wants, but not necessarily this obtains the approval of the environment. Happens a lot that people are giving their opinions from what they are experimenting, but people that have experimented their lives in function of their own conditionings, and they didn't discover their path of the soul, the advices perhaps are not that useful. And even though each path of us is a different story, we cannot fit that into a mold. People could share similar experiences, but every path is unique. And the more that we are moving forward, the more increases the sensation that there is no guidance outside, that it is oneself in connection with the divine, the path. So leadership could be seen as sustaining with in a firm way the boundaries, Saturn, that cannot be negotiated, even if this doesn't conform everyone. Or could be seen as finding a higher sense, a unifying root in postures that are in apparent very opposite. This is more linked with Neptune, and to focus ourselves in the things that could be constructive, instead of losing that energy in defending a posture, a dogma, an idea. Because what is actually defended, especially when there is this exacerbated anger, is our own identity. Egoic mind could disguise this as a social cause, but if your social cause is leading you to insult, attack, or involving actively in conflicts that are not going anywhere, there is not true intention of building. Leadership is recognizing when we have to establish force, and we have to be firm to move forward, even if we are having doubts about our own capacities, and when true strength is to retire and to stop battling without sense. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.